What would a tesseract look like if we 3D printed it and took a photo? Part 3. You probably want to see part 1 first. Start. The edge of the tesseract. Look, my girlfriend said. I get that if we draw a circle, pick 2 even points on the circle, and connect the points, I get a 1D line in the length dimension. If we add another 2 points, you get a grid. The central line gives you a perception axis. One axis is length, the other is width. The grid also supports a square. It's a bit hard to see here, but the square only has one front. That is, I get to see all the faces from this single view. I also get how if I take my 4 points and add a space, I can now squeeze 2 more points in. This gives a more complex grid. The central perception axis still goes through the center, with length and width sort of squeezed to allow the height dimension in. I also get to see the corner of the cube before the cube is revealed. The diagram has 3 faces. 1, 2, 3. It's hard to see here, but the cube has 2 views, a front view and a back view. 3 faces times 2 views gives us a total of 6 faces, just like the number of sides of a die or dice. That is, I can account for all 6 faces with these 2 views. Now if we take our 6 points and squeeze in 2 more, we get an even more complex grid. Hey up! What are the pink bits for? I interrupted. It's what we're trying to find out, she said. I thought we were trying to find out what a 2D picture of a tesseract looks like, not to get to the bottom of your pink bits. The central perception axis still goes through the center with length, width, height, and the extra dimension. What should we call it? She asked. My vote is for Germantrude. I'm not going to call a dimension Germantrude. What about extent? After all, it starts EX for extra dimension, which makes it easy to remember. Anyway, we would have length, width, height, and the extent. We also see the vertex of the tesseract before the tesseract is revealed. The tesseract has 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6 faces. It's hard to see here, but the hypercube has a front, a back, a left, and a right side. That is, I can see everything from these 4 views. If I take these 6 faces and times it by the 4 views, I get a total of 24 faces, which is the correct amount for a tesseract. Also, I have 2 cubes. If we times that by the 4 views, this will give us a total of 8 cubes, which is also correct. But the question remains, how do we prove we have a 2D photo of a tesseract? Our circle and square series may well have produced a valid 1D line, a 2D square, and a 3D cube, but how do we know the next member in the series is a 4D tesseract? Past performance is no guarantee of future results, I surmised. Exactly, she said. Well, it's really quite simple, I smiled. Really? She replied. Let's just go into the 4th dimension, take a photo, and compare it to our diagram. Job done. Her eyes narrowed. You could always just trust me, I suppose. After all, I am male, so obviously my word is law, and you must obey me without question. The room suddenly went silent. She subtly shifted her stance, moving weight from one leg to the other. Menacingly, this left a knee free to strike at a moment's notice. You're right, of course, I said, breaking the silence. I mirrored her stance, putting as much space between her knee and my more sensitive male body parts as possible. Perhaps rather than proving the diagram is correct, we should see if it's incorrect. That is, see if it breaks a known property of the tesseract. After all, proving a statement true is difficult. If I say all swans are white, then no matter how many examples of a white swan I experience, I will never prove the statement is correct. But a single example of a black swan is enough to disprove the statement. Once you experience black, you can't go back. So, let's go hunting. Let's go hunting black swans and see if we can disprove this is a proper picture of a tesseract. But where to start? Previously we found our 24 faces and 8 cubes represented in our tesseract picture. But what about edges? A tesseract has 32 edges, which is a lot. After all, a cube only has 12. So let's start with a simple 2D picture of a cube before we tackle the tesseract. The diagram before us has 9 visible edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9. 3 in the middle, 6 on the outside. Gives us 9. The 3D cube has a front and a back. So 9 edges times 2 views gives us 18 edges. But a cube only has 12 edges. The reason for this accounting mismatch is that the edges on the perimeter are shared by both views and so are being counted twice. An edge, after all, is the border between 2 faces. Any edge that does not have 2 faces visible in our diagram must be sharing a face with the back and so can only be counted as half an edge. There are 6 of these half edges. Meanwhile, in the middle of the shape, we have 3 more edges, each with their corresponding 2 faces. So here we have 3 wholly owned edges. 6 half edges plus 3 wholly owned edges is 6. So 6 on the back, 6 on the front gives us 12 edges. 12 edges is the correct number of edges for a 3D cube. So, tick, all present and correct as expected. This diagram is the front of our tesseract, and there are 16 visible edges. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10, 11, 12, 13, 14, 15, 16. So 16 on the front, 16 on the back gives us 32. Tick, all present and correct, all good. End of video. Goodbye, thanks for coming. Subscribe at... Hang on, she said. I don't think so, pal. Surely the edges on the outside perimeter need to be shared with the other sides. She took a deep breath. And because it's a 4D shape, it has a front, a back, a left and a right side, not just a 3D front and back. You are shoehorning the figures to give the correct number, she accused. I looked at her in horror. Not only had she been politely pretending to listen, it seemed she'd been politely pretending to understand as well. I call Black Swan, she triumphantly proclaimed. I shook my head sadly. No, I'm afraid not. There is no black swan. It's much, much worse than that. I'm just going to pause the video here. We're about to reveal some earth-shattering fundamental realities of the universe that might shake your sanity. Many good people, some of them mathematicians, have lost their minds to the hyperverse. Viewer discretion is advised. Perhaps now is a really good time to go and get that coffee and buckle in, because 3D Kansas is going bye-bye. Please remember to hit the upvote button before you buckle in, as it's hard to use the mouse when you're strapped to a chair. Anyway, back to the show. I'm not sure about this, she said, as I tightened the last buckle holding her to the chair. We can't expect the viewers to practice safe maths if we don't practice safe maths ourselves, I chilled. Now open up, I said, as I picked up the mouthguard from the table. You won't be the first or last person to lose their minds in the maths world. Ready? I asked, with thumbs up. Mm-hmm, she replied. The rules of reality are as follows. It may seem a bit obvious, but a square face must have two different dimensions. You can choose any two dimensions from length, width, height, or extent, but they must be different. This is why a square face is called a two-dimensional object. She nodded in understanding. A square face has edges. An edge is a one-dimensional line that must be one of the two dimensions taken from the square face. You can't have an edge of a square in the height dimension if the square itself is in the width and length dimension. You can only have an edge of length or width for that particular square. She nodded yet again. And finally, if two faces are connected together at an edge, both touching faces will share the same edge. She nodded as far as the straps would allow her head to move. That's it, I said softly. I could see she was deeply impressed with my observations. I allowed her time to compose herself, for I gingerly unstrapped her. That's the earth-shattering news, she said. The one that sends people over the edge into the abyss? I nodded. Yep. Think it through. She paused. In the 2D world, we have only two dimensions, and a square needs both, length and width. A length-width square, if you will. An edge of this square, measured in the length dimension, can only be attached to one square in the 2D world. After all, there is only one square that exists, the length-width square. There are no other dimensions to make a square from. In the 3D world, we have the same length-width square connected to the same edge, but now the edge can be connected to another square called the length-height square. So our edge is now connected to two different squares at the same time. Meanwhile, in the 4D world, we have the length-width square and the length-height square as before. But now the edge can be connected to another square called the length-extent square from the extra dimension called the extent. Our edge, measured in length, is now connected to three different squares at the same time. The length-width square, the length-height square, and the length-extent square. One more than in the 3D world which we are used to. But where is the last yellow square? My girlfriend asked. It's obscured by another feature of the Tesseract. It's just not part of the front side. She nodded. Fine, she said. This all seems pretty straightforward enough to me. I see no justification whatsoever to tie me up as a plot device in this little narrative. But I haven't finished yet, I said. You see, our edge in the length dimension is not special. It's just what we focused on to understand what was going on. If we rotated the tesseract by 90 degrees, our length edge could become a width edge, or a height edge, or even an extent edge. This means every edge in our tesseract connects to three square faces at the same time. How could you ever picture that? She gasped. How can a 1D line be connected to three faces at the same time and all the faces be on the outside? I don't know if we physically can with our 2D eyes. We have to make up for it with our brains. In much the same way we see distance when we look out on the 3D world with only one eye open, we need to use our brains to see three faces connected to an edge which are all on the outside of the object. She looked at me and blinked. I think you should have buckled me in a little tighter, she said. The front photo of a tesseract has 8 edges on the perimeter. Each perimeter edge has only one visible square attached to it on the front side diagram. Therefore, each perimeter edge must be connected to 2 other squares on other sides. These perimeter edges can only be counted as a third of an edge belonging to the front side. The other 8 non-perimeter edges are clearly connected to 2 faces on the front side diagram. But we know they must be connected to another one to make 3. These not on the perimeter edges can only be counted as 2/3 of an edge belonging to the front side. So, 8 perimeter third edges plus 8 non-perimeter 2/3 edges gives us 8 3/3 edges belonging to the front side. Or, as I like to say, 8. I paused. My girlfriend took a deep breath and continued. And since the tesseract is a 4D shape, it has a front, a back, a left, and a right. Meaning 8 on the front, 8 on the back, 8 on the left, and 8 on the right gives us 32, i.e. the right amount. No black swan, she sighed. I'm afraid not, I confirmed. But I really wanted that black swan, she said. So did I. She paused. Why? It's your diagram. Surely you want it to be correct. I know. But, you see, we've accounted for 32 edges, 24 sides, and even 8 cubes. This means the corners are up next. So, she said. Well, the truth is, I haven't done the maths for the next video. I'm flying by the seat of my pants. Like you, I don't know what happens next. A black swan today means I can stop and do something constructive, like my ironing or my house chores. I see, she said. A great big smile slowly broke over her face. Well, she said breezily, you better get to it then and work it all out. She patted the chair gently. Make yourself comfortable while I strap you in. What? Well, we can't expect our viewers to practice safe maths if we don't set an example ourselves. Now can we? Now be a good boy and strap in. Where is that mouth guard? She murmured. Ah, good. There it is. Say ah. I replied. She smiled and kissed me on the forehead. Hey, thanks for watching. A contribution, any contribution would be great. After all, there's only so many dead grannies I can inherit from to keep these projects alive, before I have to go back to the real world. Thanks goes out to my single subscriber. You are awesome. Thanks, Mum. Displayed on the screen is my QR code to my funding page. It's a Buy Me a Coffee page, which I also use for my other website, os++.org. The website is at the bottom of the screen if you need to type it in. If you do go there, you should be taken to a page like this. Anyway, thanks goes to the following open source projects which I used to create this video. The credits are in the video description, and in no particular order we have Wikipedia and Wikipedia Commons. Openshot, a 3D modeler with an animate function. LibreCad, which I use for the outlines. Inkscape, which I use for the colouring in and placement. Gimp, which I use for touch-up work. Audacity, which I use for sound work. And Openshot, which I use to stitch it all together into a video. There's also images taken from the Wikimedia Commons. As I said, credits in the video description. Thanks for your hard work, and if you can't sponsor me, consider sponsoring them. Well, that's about it. See ya.